Hello, podcast friends, and welcome to today's episode of the PrimeKnowledge Podcast. Details about today's episodes can be found in the show notes below. Today's episode, we have Mel and Joe, my business partners here at PrimeKnowledge, and we're going to be talking all about our experiences of selling our businesses. So let's go to you first, Joe. You're in a business together, so you're both going to talk about it together. The business and then the exit of that business as well. So over to you, Joe.
Yeah, that's cool. In fact, actually, I'm going to do a little bit of a backstory because the business that we're going to talk about isn't the first business that we had set up and run together. So Melinda and I actually met working for a commercial conference company in London, and eventually, to cut a long story short, we then set up our own conference company. And we've been running that for a number of years. We decided that we wanted to set up an estate agency and go into a different business, having bought investment property. And for 12 months, we hired someone to operate the conference company that we had been running. But the business itself had largely been dependent upon our skill and knowledge. And we hadn't ever thought about how to pass the value that we built in the company onto someone else. So for the first 12 months while we ran our agency, we also had somebody running our conference business. And then after the agency had succeeded, we then shut the conference company down or wound it up, in effect. Now, in retrospect, what we should have done was use the intellectual capital that we'd created. We had actually successfully taken ourselves out of the business. So conceivably, we were in a position to sell something on, but we didn't know how. And as a consequence, we probably left tens of thousands of pounds just to go to waste in the company that we'd run for 8 years and then had no succession planning for. So when we started our agency, we knew then that at some point we needed an exit strategy that we could build towards. Now, we actually started our agency in 2005, and those of us old enough to remember might have noticed that real estate took something of a hit in 2008. So actually, we grew really quickly in the start of our business, and then we kind of stalled for about 8 years of staying in business, just being a good year. And we were aware that we'd built something with a commercial value, in particular the rental roster, which is where the value of an estate agency really lies. So you're constantly fighting for new sales business. So what you've got in your books this month isn't going to be the same in 6 months' time. So you've got a little bit of goodwill, you've got a little bit of brand recognition, but you don't have a tangible business to sell. But the rental book actually does have a tangible commercial value. And we knew from conversations with the bank that the only way to realise that value was actually to sell it. They wouldn't loan against it, because if you got in financial trouble, then you'd be in a fire sale. And although it had a notional capital value, if you had to sell in a panic, they couldn't use it as security. Mm-hmm. So when we started to get to the process of looking at a sale, we knew that's where the value of our business resided, but also that's the only way we could realise that value. There was no other way of getting the money out of the company other than a sale. So if we jump forward, we started our agency in 2005, 2008 to 16 were kind of difficult years. And in the middle of that time period, we almost swapped roles. So at the beginning, I was working full-time in the business. Melinda was a director, but not really hands-on involved. And then around kind of 2008-9, Melinda became a director of one of the offices that we had. And then in 2012, Melinda's office actually reverse took over the rest of the company. And by that point, I had a period of time when I was working outside of the business, was still a director, but was doing other things in sports development. And back end of 2016 was kind of the biggest financial crisis in our company. We then restructured the business a little bit and had decided at that point that we were going to build the business back, but build it with a view to sale. So if I pass over to you, Mel, because at this point, back end of 2016, early 2017, Mel is managing director of a business with 3 offices.
Yep.
And I'm kind of director, but not really hands-on involved.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to actually manage the business through the start of the sale process.
Yeah. So I was a terrific business owner in that I was immersed in it and not very good at being on it. So strategy and all those kind of things were often, put to the back end of the pile. So trying to stay abreast of marketing, keeping the brand out there. We'd established something really great. We had a good reputation within the marketplace. We knew our service delivery was good, our training was good, all our regulations and things were all meeting criteria. So from that perspective, we knew that we had, a good, solid business. In that 2016 period, to manage that, we actually owned an office premises. So we had a property transaction where that enabled us to sell the property on, get some investment back into the business to make sure that we were able to continue cash flowing correctly. Because when you get borderline towards, you can't pay the bills or you can't pay the staff, suddenly you are in that fire sale position, which we knew, forward advance enough that we could see what was happening and needed that catch-all to get us through that period. So, yeah, there were some valuable business lessons throughout our whole ownership of the business. So not just understanding our industry, not just being good in our industry, but staffing issues, marketing issues, the stationery, the printer, the practicalities, some property transactions as well going on there, separate from servicing, the transaction of selling or renting clients' properties. So that was pretty good. Fast forward to 2018, and our sales manager had aspirations to run his own business. So we worked together for a few months, and it became apparent the synergy between us. He would be, he wanted his own independent agency. So we were able to sell the sales side across to him and allow him to flourish in his own arena, which worked well for both of us, which was great. And that left us then with the rental roster, which we developed and was quite substantial. And then, we started looking then at exit strategies, I suppose.
So it was interesting times. We'd already decided that we wanted to get rid of the whole business. And our sales manager was an obvious potential buyer. He was working in the company. He could see the potential, knew what we were doing, but also had aspirations to take things in his own direction. One of the things that we did find, we talked with him, and he'd only run sales previously. And our concern was a kind of a responsibility to the clients that we had from the rental perspective, because obviously landlords, when they instruct you to manage their property, it's an act of trust and faith for a long-term relationship. You're looking after their retirement plan or their principal source of income in some cases. And we were concerned that our prospective buyer didn't have enough knowledge of rentals to be able to also take on the running of a business for the first time and be managing a sector that he'd never worked in previously. So although initially he was looking at finance to buy the whole of the company, we felt that wasn't a good solution for him or for the clients that we had responsibility for. We could have taken the pot of money from him and walked away, but we still got to live in our town, and we still got to have relationships with the people that had been our clients and our customers. So actually, in discussion, I won't say persuaded him, but we made him aware of the challenges that we thought he would face. And we came to an arrangement whereby we sold only the sales business to him and agreed that this would stay something out of the public domain, in as much as we'd both continue to trade under the same brand. And if people spoke to one office, we would just redirect them to the other team. So if we had sales inquiries or if he had rentals inquiries, we'd say, oh, you need to speak to our rental team. So that was kind of an interesting process, how we built that relationship more on a trust basis. The actual documents for the sale gave time periods by which we'd separate the companies and the restriction of access to one another's data after a period of time, and how we'd separate the computer systems, which was all internal in our arrangement. But the external presentation to the outside world was done on a trust basis. When there
was continuity of goodwill, continuity of branding, and continuity of staff as well. So they're sort of the the big things from my perspective, handing the business over, I wanted to make sure that all of those things were protected, which that was just a personal thing as well.
So when we sold that business, he took on responsibility for 2 staff members, I think, and for the entire sales process within now a separated business. But the outside world wouldn't have known. They would have walked into his sales office and not realised it wasn't part of the same company as the rentals 2 offices that we had in that arena. So for a couple of years, that's how we existed. And at that point, Melinda then was managing director of the rental business in 2 different locations. And I didn't really have any hands-on involvement because I had come back into the business but was working with sales. And once we sold that, my role in the business in front of the customers had completely disappeared. So when then we were looking to sell the rest of the business,
I think that was instigated by me needing to take a break. I was reaching burnout point by this stage. I was managing the business, and as I said, we had great reputation, good quality staff, good quality service, and a viable business. What I didn't do is spend any time looking after myself. So, you can alternate 5-6 days a week in the business, and then the VAT returns due that keeps you there till 11 o'clock in the evening because that's when it's quiet and you're not interrupted by phone calls and things. So where I started basically was being in the business and not on it. That led to a very high personal cost, which is why then it was necessary to start looking for an exit and the best way to do that. And you find yourself sort of doing some self-examination, some business examination, how to best value, where do you start from in the sales process. But in the arena that we're in, it's a highly competitive industry. So it's not something that you can confide in the staff, that you can confide in your competitors, that you can confide in, the local industry, simply because as soon as there's any sort of sense of vulnerability, suddenly you're going to start losing clients, and, there will be other competitors that are getting in there very swiftly, either for the staff or for our clients. So that was in addition to needing an exit for burnout purposes, you also then can't reach out to anybody for assistance or feel like you can't. And that's a heavy place to be in. So that's where, the 2 of us being involved actually was a real asset, because I was being jackknifed. On the one hand, you front up to the staff, the business, this is where we're going. This is what this week looked like. This is what the next month looks like. This is our plan for the future to keep growing. And then on the other hand, I need to exit, for myself and for the business purposes, but I need to protect the staff and know that they're going to be okay. And they're really, 180 degrees. And to do that too rapidly, just creates additional stress. So Joe was the lead when it came to sourcing new buyers, potential buyers, and doing the lead on negotiation.
Yeah, we were very fortunate to be able to bounce things off each other. Before we completed the sale of the sales business, we had actually spoken with a broker and engaged in a couple of conversations with other local businesses to kind of see what interest they had, to get valuations and what kind of aspirations we might have for a sale price on the business. And in particular, we were fortunate to deal with a guy who was worked with a local franchise agency as the owner, and was very upfront and honest in the dealings that we had with him. Now, as it was, he didn't go ahead with that sale because there was an internal problem with their company, and he didn't at that point then feel he could make an investment. But having those early conversations, all in secret and kind of, meetings in coffee shops at the outskirts of town sort of thing, did give us a bit of a lead into what the process would look like. It was really interesting as well, because every time we met with anybody about anything, there would be a rumour in the office about we were for sale or who was buying us, or competitors had started to suggest that we were for sale, even when that wasn't true. So I met with one local agency manager about an issue relating to a kind of a property that we both had been involved in the management of. And even before I got back to the office, somebody had seen us or made comment of, "Oh, you're selling to them, are you?" So we got used to the whole process of denying that there was anything going on. And it was also an interesting time because it was around about the time of the tenant fee ban in the state agency. And a lot of businesses who had depended heavily upon charging tenants couldn't make their business work on the size of the roster that they had, losing up to 50% of their revenue. Whereas that wasn't ever a part of our revenues, or less than 8%. So there was a weird time in our market when most of the agencies were either for sale or buying or both or one or the other, because they couldn't continue at the size and scale that they were. And that wasn't the case for us. So once we'd gone through the sale of the sales roster and we were just representing 2 different rental portfolios, we were in a weird position that everyone was a potential buyer or everyone was also selling into the market, but we were the only ones who were doing it with a robust and strong business that we were choosing to exit from. But as Mel's indicated, it did mean that I could go and talk to prospective buyers, and I could go and sit down and have those kind of initial conversations of, what are you looking for? Will our portfolio meet your requirements? Will your pricing and willingness to spend and access to finance meet our financial need? And so I could do that without having to then front up to the staff or without having to be sat in the office talking about the 10-year plans that I never wanted to have to implement. And it wasn't until later in the process where we got the outline structures of conversations set up that then Mel, as the director, the managing director, and the hands-on person with the inside knowledge of how the business looked, got involved in the conversations. And we'd also, by this point, built up a really good working conversational relationship with a sort of developing trust over time with the 3 directors of the business that we eventually sold the biggest share of our portfolio to.
I mean, I was involved in some of those discussions after the initial introductions that Joe had made. So I was able to talk very specifically about the strengths of the business, the weaknesses of the business, anything that they might require for due diligence. So I could offer that nitty-gritty reassurance, down to an individual client, an individual product, an individual transaction. So, I had all of that information in my head. I was immersed in it to the nth degree. As I said, kind of to my detriment, but equally, it was something that we had all the answers that were going to be thrown at us when they were inquiring about, what the business looked like, how it operated, and that sort of thing, which was useful. So when we had the due diligence stage, we knew exactly what kind of questions they would be asking, what kind of information they would need, and originally that process was going to be 30 different properties and all the associated regulations that we needed to document or prove or show or demonstrate. And actually, we only got a part way through that process, and they just were, reassured, yep, okay, everything is as it should be. So it was predetermined. It wasn't under pressure, and the way in which we were able to approach it meant that once the transaction had actually gone through, I didn't feel any regret. I didn't feel any, I've done the wrong thing here. I felt an element of control as to who we were going to sell to, confidence in their ability to keep the business running with the same level of, looking after the staff, looking after the clients, and the same level of service. So there was lots of synergies there that put me at ease to be able to then step away from it and know that it was in good hands, that my staff were in good hands, and put in place things for those that, if I couldn't relocate them, that they were going to be looked after elsewhere anyway, because we'd made some good industry connections along the way.
We had some kind of heavy duty learning experiences on the way. So there's a couple of things I draw from that. The first is that there were stages earlier on in the process where we had potential sales that then fell through and the buyers pulled out. I mentioned one of them earlier on. And I think, although that was a shock the first time round, that then prepared us much better for when the actual sale went through, that we were willing to walk away if we needed to, because we knew we could come out the other side of it. And I do think that we were very fortunate in having each other to take on different parts and roles and responsibilities, both within the business and within the sales process. If you were the single owner manager of a business, then it's going to take almost kind of like a split personality to be able to manage that as one person. It was hard for both of us anyway, when I was talking to staff or when Mel was in conversations about the sale of the business and then going back into the office. But to do that as a solopreneur would be a really, really big challenge, I think, that people need to be properly prepared for. And actually, Andy, that's kind of similar to, much closer to the scenario I think you found yourself in.
Yeah, I think I had a conversation yesterday with somebody that's going to be another interview on the podcast about a lot of the same stuff, struggling with the secrecy of it, this kind of split personality that you have to create as a owner, managing director of a business, where you have to put together all the bits and pieces that the buyer needs whilst not letting anyone else know. You have to be fully in that when you're there, and then fully in something else with the staff, and also that real want and need for the buyer to be the right person. Obviously there's the financial reasons that you're selling, but there's also typically the reasons why you get to the point where you want to sell. And the things that you say are very similar to my experience, and very similar to experience that the conversation I've had with other business owners that have sold. And you're totally right, like, it's so difficult balancing those things. So when did you finally exit the business? When did all of that happen for you? The final stage of that, when was that?
So there was 3 stages, and the whole lot ended in the end of 2021.
Yeah. So the purchasers of our predominant roster, which was the biggest part of our sale, didn't actually want the other office that we had with a very small roster associated. So after we sold the sales business, a couple of years later sold the majority of our roster, but then we still had one office with a much smaller portfolio and turnover, which we continued to run for another 12 months, and then eventually sold that to a business local to that area that I'd actually met through business networking, started a conversation. Melinda then actually took over the conversation and managed the sales process. And although we sold the business to a guy that I've met through online business networking, I've still never actually met the person in the real, whereas Melinda managed to hand over and went and did all of the processes to kind of finish that transaction face to face. And that was a much easier and simpler transaction, mostly because it was a much smaller roster and therefore a smaller amount of money. And whereas the bulk, the middle bit, we did on a staged payment. So we got 70% up front, and then the final payments were made over 12 months with a reconciliation at the very end of the 12 months that evaluated how much of the roster had stayed. So even for 12 months, we still had a vested interest in the handover process, the managing of relationships, the resolving of any issues. For the final part of the sale, that was just a single transaction. It was stage payments, but it wasn't conditional on anything. So it was, here's half the money up front and here's the rest of the money over the next 6 months paid in installments.
I think we were able to better negotiate that, having been through the 3 different sales. So the sale of the sales part of the business was one that was the first ever completed transaction. Before that, we'd had somebody, as Joe had alluded to, that was looking at the business as a whole, and that didn't proceed for their own particular reasons. But that was kind of a nice introduction to the concept of selling, what that might look like, what the contract might look like, and as you said, being very heavily invested in that, and then it didn't come to fruition, and being utterly devastated and unprepared for it not to go through. So that was its own roller coaster again, in the middle of a stressful time. So that was the very first experience of what does it look like to sell a business. And then, then the completed sale, the sale of the primary part of the lettings roster. And then by the time we'd got to that smaller sale, my confidence had grown, my understanding of expectations of the buyer had grown, how to manage the staff, and what that looked like. So, by that final phase, I did, was far more comfortable with the whole transaction.
Yeah.
And I think now, having given a couple of years to calm down, get through COVID, get through, what does life look like on the other side? Would I do it again? Yes, but in a much tighter time scale, without all the economy doing various things and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, when we started the whole sales process, we didn't really have a clue what we were doing, and we didn't have any kind of mentorship or coach that we could go to or monitor, anyone to talk to about the process. And we learned stuff as we got burned. And actually, the first guy that we spoke to who had to withdraw, as I say, was a guy who was actually very honest and very straightforward. And we learned an awful lot from the process of conversation with him, because we happened upon a decent bloke. And although he wasn't the buyer, in the end, we learned lots and lots through that. But also, it was a devastating process when he pulled out, because we had already written our future plans and then they didn't happen. So as Melinda said, when we finally got to the sale, we thought we'd actually been in the sales process for more than 4 years by the time we got rid of the last part of the business, sold the smaller of the final part of the three-stage transaction. So by the time we finished and walked away from the business for good, full stop, the end, we felt like actually we knew an awful lot about the sales process. But I wish that we could have learned that without having to go through it over such a prolonged period of time and with so many kind of body blows along the way.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what brought us to where we are now. It's like we've as obviously we know, Andy, how we came to form this business, was that you were talking about the emotional and the psychological challenges that you were finding with the sale of your business, and we'd been through a lot of that, and recognised so many touch points that.
But even being surrounded by professionals, you've got your broker, you've got your solicitor, the people that are meant to know this industry inside out, and they do it impassionately, because there's no affiliation with the business per se, but yeah, that emotional side of things, as well as they don't prepare you for all the nitty gritty that your business involves, and so I think you've had similar experience of that, Andy.
Yeah, I think we sat down together as a team, and something that came out of some of the really early conversations we had is that I mean, you've used it just earlier while you were talking, was the emotional roller coaster of the whole process. And that is the bit that's affected me the most before, during, and after the sale. It's the bit that I still can't quite get my head around what I feel about the sale over a year later. And it's so true. I had a very similar experience. I spoke to someone recently who had a very similar experience of not knowing the process, not understanding the process, not knowing what to expect, coming out of that process feeling completely and utterly like empty and lost and not knowing what to do, because you can get a broker and you can get a solicitor and you can put some of those power teams together, but ultimately, who is helping you as the business owner through that process? And that's the bit that is exactly why we're sat here today having a conversation about this, is because it would have really benefited us to have had that, and that's kind of why we're having these conversations. So yeah, and also I think it's good to know that there's not just one way to sell a business, and every single person I speak to has something different within that process. It's not a case of going, well, and I talk about this a lot, and I like the process to selling a home if a home was constantly changing and evolving. So a business is much more complicated. There's a lot more things going on, and the way you sell it can be completely different.
Yeah.
My experience, which I'm going to talk about shortly, is very different to your guys' experience. It's very difficult to the people that I've spoke to about it. Is everyone's sales journey is different, and the way they structure the deal is very different as well. Whether they stay on or whether they go, whether there's a handover, whether there's stage payments, whether there's, whatever it might be, it's all very different. So thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else you wanted to share on the podcast today? And then if not, I'll go into mine.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear your story.
Perfect. So, my business, I was working as a handyman, sort of property maintenance guy. In 2013, we bought a garden fence and supplies company. At the time, I didn't realize it at the time, but we did a no money down deal. Basically, they were selling the building and the business all in one. We didn't have the money, but the person that wanted to buy the building didn't want to continue running the business, and they wouldn't sell all of it without the business continuing. So we went into a deal with the person that wanted to buy the building that we would continue to run the business into the foreseeable future. So we basically did a JV deal where we ran the business and rented the building back, and he bought the building. So it worked quite well, really. I didn't realize kind of how good a deal it was till later, really. It just kind of happened. I ran that business for 10 years, firstly with my dad and then later on with my brother-in-law. And we manufactured garden buildings, gates, fence panels. We supplied material to the trade and the public, and we fitted garden fences, sheds, gates, all that kind of stuff for customers on site. And built that business from a small unit with 2 members of staff to 15 members of staff and a much bigger premises, generating kind of quite a nice turnover, nearly a 7-figure turnover towards the end. And so what brought on the sale? So I built the business basically with the idea that I would sell at some point. Not really with any kind of dates in mind. I didn't really thought about when. I just kind of knew that I would sell it at some point, and that was as much thought as I put into it. I will sell it at some point in the future. So what I did is kind of set the business up in a way that I could sell it without really going into any of the kind of details of that. I didn't look at what it was like to sell a business, what the process was like, anything. I had no understanding of what that would look like. I just kind of built the business so it could be sold. And then during COVID in 2022, good old COVID, we had to shut. And then when we reopened, we were the busiest we'd ever been. We were doing the most amount of turnover. I brought in new vehicles, new staff, new machinery. We were growing at the quickest rate we'd ever grown at. And things were great, but my mental health wasn't. So I dealt with depression during that period in time. I'd never dealt with depression before, and it pushed the case that I wasn't happy in the business. I'd been in that business for 7 and a bit years at that point. I felt like I'd kind of done what I set out to do, and I wasn't happy with the hours I was working, the stress that I was giving myself. A little bit like you, Mel. I was working on the business a bit, but I was still in the business and still struggling to let go of certain parts of that business. And post sale, I think I started to look back on a lot of the ways I ran that business and realised that I was very much more emotionally attached to that business than I realised.
Yeah.
And I thought I could, speak to a broker, sell the business and walk away, and that would be the end of it. But I think after you've worked alongside certain members of staff have been in that business from before I even bought the business. I bought them from my previous company. Yeah. I then had members of staff that came in the early days and they were still there. And I felt an emotional attachment to those guys. And I felt responsible for what happened and I still feel a bit responsible now. And we're over a year later since I've sold. And I think that was something I really, really didn't take time to consider before I went through the process. Mm-hmm. So fast forward to a couple of years later, I think I was in better mental health, but I still wasn't dealing very well with the business. And we had a phone call basically just out of the blue from a broker saying, would you sell your business? And at that point, I was very seriously considering it. My business partner would have quite happily sold it at any point. So we went through the process of putting it on the market through a national broker. And I think that process took maybe 6 to 12 months, maybe a little bit longer to go through the process. So that was from initial meeting where we're talking about what's the business worth, how's it run, what's your accounts like, through to here's the sale document that the broker has put together for me, from everything the business does and all the equipment it has and all the leases and all the stuff that they need for the first part of the due diligence process, up to the actual point where I signed the document and I had a meeting with the staff and I walked out. So that was probably a 12 to 18 month process, a very stressful process. I think I was very close to a breakdown towards the end of that process, where there was issues with the contract and the person buying my business wanted to negotiate lower terms, and I wasn't in a good enough mental state to kind of deal with any of it. So it was just a very difficult time. I eventually sold my business in March of 2023, and I felt totally empty. I was completely emotionless. I just thought that after running the business for 10 years, going through what I'd been through in the business, and then selling it as I thought that's what I wanted, that I would feel something. I'd feel sad, I'd feel happy, I'd feel, I don't know, elated, whatever.
And celebrating,
Yeah,
and
I
you
but
just
I
go a bit numb.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think I had a conversation with Joe straight after. I'm like, this is so weird. I just don't feel anything. I don't know and I couldn't figure it out. I didn't really want to do anything. I just felt a bit kind of lost. And I probably felt like that for several months after that. I'd made no plans for what to do next after business. I kind of, it was a very, very weird time, and I can totally relate to your guys' experience. My experience wasn't 4 years long. I think if it was, I probably would have had a full-on breakdown. But I think just how difficult that process was, um, from everything from the details and the documents and the long conversations with accountants and solicitors and all of that kind of stuff, to the day-to-day going in the office and not being honest. I'm a really honest person. I say things how they are, and I care about people. I'm really thoughtful about the decisions I make, whether that's at home or whether that's in a business setting. And then suddenly I had to be dishonest on a daily basis because I couldn't tell people, because I felt like it would be a detriment to them, and I was trying to do what I thought was best for the business and for them guys, because I wasn't in a state that I could continue to stay in that business. And I think that's the fight. And you talked about it so well, Mel, like how much you cared about wanting the staff to be looked after. And and I think people that aren't business owners and that haven't been business owners and employed people before, I think they just presume that you just don't care. All business owners don't care. They just care about getting paid, and they want to make these big businesses. And I think actually, ultimately, without those people, our businesses don't exist.
I think that's one of the unique positions that business owners and entrepreneurs fill, is that, you talk about the big boss and the nasty man and the greedy rich. And actually, it's the business owners and the entrepreneurs that do something that create jobs for people. They create that security, and they rely on you month on month, week on week, however they get paid, to know that their position is secure, that they're coming in, they've got something to do, they've got guidance and help and support when they need it. And at the end of the month, there will be a pay packet that enables them to go off and lead their lives. And you're then, as soon as anything goes wrong, you're then in the position of responsibility to look after them, to look after whatever the situation is that's gone wrong. And, okay, it's up to you to now fix it, And so Entrepreneurship is it's a big deal. You are responsible for the good, you are responsible for the bad, and guaranteed you will get blamed.
And I think that feeds into what you say about the kind of the emptiness, the absence that you felt once your sale had gone through. I mean, we were fortunate that we could stage things over a number of years, and we had 3 different exit points where our circumstances changed. But because an owner, manager, an entrepreneur has so much responsibility, both for the running of the business and then for the whole intensity and uncertainty of the sales process, running in parallel tracks in secret from one another, and then suddenly all of that stops. And it's not a surprise that it's like coming off the edge of a cliff, because it's just such an intense process selling, and it's such a level of responsibility owning and running a business for all the lives of all the staff that you employ and all the relationships with all the clients that you serve and the suppliers who serve you. And then at the end of that, contract end, done. So it's a hell of a change.
Yeah, I think what I was where I was heading, even just before the final bit, when you were talking about feeling dishonest, for me it was a sense of open or closed. Rather than dishonesty, it was, as a personality, I'm quite open, and so yes, there was that inner conflict of I don't want to tell you. Partly for the protection of the business and the things that I outlined about competitors swooping in, either to steal the staff because they're feeling uncertain or stealing clients, but also to protect the staff, to maintain that level of continuity and consistency that didn't cause them worry. Because I had, you never quite know, and I know from your experience, the things that you're expecting from your staff don't necessarily come out that way. When you get to that completion process, people react differently.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've got to expect the unexpected. Thanks, guys, for coming on to the podcast today. It's been amazing to hear your business journey and your ultimate exit of those businesses over sort of in different ways. So thank you guys for coming in. So thank you for listening to the podcast today. Follow us on Apple and Spotify. All the information about today's episode can be found in the show notes below. And check out our Facebook page for all up-and-coming events specifically related to selling your business. We've got lots of up-and-coming in-person courses helping people navigate the journey of selling your business. So if that's something you're thinking about doing, whether that's today or within the next 10 years of your business, we can help you have a really nice, smooth transition out of your business. So hopefully this podcast has been helpful. I'm Andy. This is Mel and Joe. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.